Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the final webinar in our series. This is Automation for Jira's 7 Rules to Automate Your Jira Service Desk. So as you might have guessed, this webinar is going to be based around basically how you can make your Jira Service Desk better. And one of the things we've really focused on is only showing you rules that we use ourselves in-house. So something that's really, really useful. It's very much a practical webinar. Whereas beforehand, we focus a lot, I suppose, in the first webinar on the basic building blocks of webinars of automation rules and how you put the rules together. The second webinar was all about more complex features like smart values, linked issues, global rules. This one sits nicely in the middle. These are just basically rules that anybody can use. I create these rules all the time myself to help us. So everybody in the team here does their own customer support. And these are rules that just help us do our job that little bit better. So just before we get started, another 30 seconds or so, let's do a little bit of housekeeping. So Andreas is here beside me. Took his head in, and he's just typing away answering questions. So if you can ask your questions in the Q&A section rather than the chat section, that'll be much easier. We'll prioritize those because it's much easier to answer those ones. Equally, as ever, if you have either Pro, Server, Lite, paid version, this webinar should be suitable for all, so don't mind too much if it looks a bit different. We're going to be going through it on server. Runtime's about 35 minutes as usual, so I'll be talking for probably the first 10 minutes or so. I'll go through a couple of basics, and then I'll hand it over to the guy who actually built it, which makes most sense. So with that, actually, it'd be a good chance for us to introduce ourselves. So I'm John. I'm the marketing guy here in Code Barrel and Automation for Jira. I'm Irish, but I've been living over here for 7 years, thoroughly enjoying the sunshine. And this is Andreas.
Yeah, hey everyone. So I'm one of the co-founders here at Code Barrel. So myself and Nick, another former Atlassian, started this company. So just a little bit of history of, I guess, where we came from and why we decided to build something like Automation for Jira. So both Nick and myself worked at Atlassian for about 9 years, and pretty much for that entire time we worked on Jira. Now, I guess one of the things we saw was that, there's a lot of tasks that were quite repetitive and mundane. So we tried to, we're always thinking about like, how can we automate these? But then also we just wanted to add a lot more power and flexibility on top of Jira. But while we worked at Atlassian, we could never get that onto a roadmap there. So then when we left 3 years ago, we started our own company. And that's really where the idea for Automation for Jira came from. And I guess we're pretty happy that we were able to build a successful add-on that we can now run a webinar about. So I'll hand back over to John now, who'll introduce the rest of this webinar.
Thank you, Andreas. Okay, so people often ask, should they automate their Jira Service Desk? For me, it's not even a question. It's something that everybody should be doing. In today's day and age, we really have to be so focused on our customers. You should be anyway, but it's a completely transparent age where one bad review can sink a company. So yes, it definitely saves time. I mean, there's manual tasks that you have to do in Jira Service Desk. Sometimes you actually have to hire someone specifically just to be closing stale issues and triaging issues, things like that. So it's going to save you a ton of time. Second of all, and probably more importantly for me and for a lot of the customers I talk to, is the fact that it does give your customer support engineers the tools they need at the right time to be able to provide the best customer support. So we're going to show you a few tricks of the trade that we use in here that allows us to keep ahead of the game. So things like keeping all the issues linked together, making sure that an issue never goes stale and goes past one day, things like that. So we're going to show you. And equally, it empowers teams. So you can, there's no need to be writing scripts or anything like that. Your team can actually tweak these rules, create their own rules, suggest rules to help them do their job better. So everybody's pushing the boat the same way. I'm not sure you push a boat, but I think you get the metaphor.
John's already thinking about sailing later today.
So as you probably know already, this isn't the only way to automate Jira Service Desk, though it is the best. The first one, and if you haven't already checked this out, you definitely should, is the inbuilt automation with Jira Service Desk. It's actually really, really good, and the UI has been improved recently to make it better again. So in there, you can go in, you can create a lot of automation rules. It does have some restrictions, and we feel that Automation for Jira is a lot better, things like being able to work across projects, for example, but it is really, really useful. And this is sort of meant to complement it rather than replace it. Secondly, what you could do is directly hit Jira's APIs, and I actually don't even know what that means. So I'm obviously not a developer, I'm the marketing dude, but if you do come from a developer background, this is something that you could do. And equally with the final one, you can write scripts. So this is something that can be quite powerful, but it can also be fairly high maintenance. And with both hitting the Jira API and the scripts, whenever it comes to upgrades, that's kind of leaving you with a lot to do. When you're using something like automation for Jira, we do all of that for you. So it's very low maintenance. But anyway, they're your options. I think it's important to know that before we kick in. Now, I've seen a few names on the attendee list here today who've been to the last couple of webinars, so I do very much apologize for constantly showing this slide, but it is important to constantly reiterate that all automation for Jira is like Lego. It's just building blocks upon building blocks, and every rule that we create is exactly the same, from the first webinar where it was beginners to the more advanced to today where we're creating quite specific rules for Service Desk. So it's just going to be the usual triggers, conditions, actions, and a little bit more, and we're going to create the rules. Lastly, before we jump into the first rule, as ever, all of these rules that we're creating today are going to be in the rule playground. So if you see that link up there at the top to our docs, go there, click on the rule playground, and you'll see all of these rules with the tag Jira Service Desk. So if you don't want to create these as you go along, by all means, just go in there, steal them, customize them, change them. And as I said, I'm going to jump into the first rule now and ask all the questions you like. Andreas will be taking over in 2 minutes or so. Okay, first rule is a really easy one. So these, I'm just going to do the first two in PowerPoint, and then Andreas is going to jump into automation for Jira itself, just because he doesn't trust me in the live environment, I think, probably justifiably. So with this first one, quite often a customer will stop replying to your Jira issues, so your Jira issues can stay open for a long time. So for example, you're in the morning, you're answering a support ticket, you respond to a customer, and you've no idea what's going to happen to it then. It can just float around forever. So what we've done is we've created this rule. So what we use, first of all, is this schedule trigger that you can see here. So it runs every day, and we filtered it with the JQL that anything that's in the status waiting for customer that has not been updated for 5 days, then transition that issue to resolved. So simple. That's all it is, just a scheduled rule. You can set it for whatever time you want. It's going to transition the issue to resolved. And lastly, for the sake of transparency, so everybody knows what's happening to these issues, we're going to add a comment to the issue. And the comment looks, well, it can be whatever you like essentially, but this is one that we use. So you can see at the very top of the comment, that's what we call a smart value. If you don't know what a smart value is yet, I really recommend watching our last webinar where we spent a good 20 minutes on that. Essentially, this will print out just the first name of the reporter. So it's really, really powerful, but that little bit more complex. So I won't go into any depth here today, but definitely go back and watch that second webinar. And lastly, for my rule and my presentation, this second rule is to avoid issues getting lost in limbo. So what exactly does that mean? When a customer comments on an issue, it can get lost in limbo. So let's say that initially you had asked a question to your customer, they never answered because they had gone off to Belize to find themselves. They've returned 3 months later and they comment saying, hey John, here's the answer. Often that ticket can just get lost in the ether. So what we've done is set up a rule to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. This is what it looks like. So the trigger, we respond when an issue is commented upon. That's when this rule is going to kick into action. But that's a little bit too generic. If that was to happen, there'd be a lot of rules, or a lot of issues being fired upon. So what we've done is set a couple of conditions. First one here is a compare condition. So any issue status that is resolved, we're going to refine and look for that. And we're also going to use a user condition and make sure that the initiator is not an employee. So basically, we want to make sure that it's not myself or Andreas who's left a comment, but definitely a customer who's left a comment on an issue that was already resolved. And when that's happened, we're going to transition the issue to waiting for support. And then we know that someone's going to be held accountable. We've got a support engineer who will be assigned to that issue. The customer will get their response in the usual SLA. Everything will still be in context as it was. And it's a nice little rule as well. So both of these rules are really, really simple. They actually take about 30 seconds to put together, but they're super powerful. So this is the kind of thing that if you were writing scripts or hitting APIs, it can be pretty high maintenance where it really doesn't need to be. Simplicity is always key with these things. There's no need to overcomplicate. Right, so with that, what I'm going to do is hand over to Andreas, and he is going to take over from rule 3 onwards in automation for Jira. I'm going to go back and answer questions on the chat box, and I'll chat to you in a while.
Cool, thanks, John. So I am actually going to do a live demo now again. So hopefully the demo gods will be kind to me today. So for the next rule, the use case that we want to tackle is a very common one in any support scenario or support environment. So it's the age-old problem of assigning new issues to members of your support team. So the way this usually works in Jira Service Desk is you have your queue, and as customers raise issues, they'll show up in the queue. And then people in your support team will simply pick up issues from that queue and assign them to themselves. Now in practice, that system never works really well because people are quite lazy. They'll cherry pick issues, and people who come in first will always pick the easy issues for themselves and leave all the hard ones in the queue. And then that poor sad person who comes in last will have to deal with all the really hard cases. Now, one way to solve that problem is to have like a full-time triage person in your team whose full-time job it is to look at incoming issues, assign them to people in your team, and make sure everyone's kind of got a balanced workload. Now that works pretty well, but it's obviously not a great use of that person's time. So we thought this is something that we want to automate. And so we created an automation rule that lets you automatically assign incoming support requests to members of a team. So let's take a look at how that rule works. So we'll jump into the project admin section here of our Service Desk project. And in that, we can go to the automation section. Now, we'll just go ahead and create our first rule. And for this rule, we're going to use the issue created trigger. So we want this rule to run whenever a customer raises a new support request. And then next, we're going to build a very simple rule here for starters. We can simply go and assign that issue. Now, with assigning in automation, you can do sort of all the normal things you can do as you can in Jira. So I could just assign this to a single user here. But we actually added quite a bit of power on top of this. And you can actually assign an issue to a group of people as well. So I can assign this issue to either John or myself using a balanced workload. And so the way this will work is when an issue comes in, this rule runs. It will then check how many issues does John have assigned where the status is not done, and how many issues do I have assigned to myself with the status not equals done. And then it will simply pick the person with the least number of issues assigned to them. And that's really it. So it's really quite simple and easy to create this quite powerful rule to auto-assign issues. So let's just give this a quick little name. We can identify it later. And let's actually go ahead and try that rule out. So if I jump back into my service desk, we can see here that we have, at the moment, we have even number of issues assigned. So 3 issues for myself, 3 issues for John. So let's go ahead and raise a new service desk request. So let's say John broke his laptop again. So with this issue, because at the moment we have the same number of issues assigned, it's a little bit random as to who will get this one. So it turns out that this new issue was assigned to John in this case. But now John has more issues assigned than I do. So the next issue that I'm creating here should actually get assigned to me. So John just spilled some coffee on his keyboard. And we'll jump back to our queue. And if we reload this queue, then we can see now that this new issue was actually assigned to myself. So nice and simple. This rule is now automatically balancing support issues that are raised. And as always, if you jump into the audit log of the rule, then you can dig into the details and can figure out exactly, okay, this rule executed for these 2 support requests, and the actions that were performed are kind of shown on the left-hand side there. So that's it for our first rule today. So let's look at something, another use case that's very useful in a service desk environment. So one thing that Service Desk provides out of the box is SLAs. So let's just jump across real quick and have a look at these. So SLAs let you define service level agreements where you can make sure that your support team is responding to customers in a timely fashion, And you can set these up and configure them in any way you want. So this is really quite powerful and super useful already. But with automation, you can add another layer on top of this, and you can make sure that no issues fall through the cracks. So what happens quite often is that we have staff potentially going on leave or on sick leave. And in that case, we want to make sure that issues that are currently assigned to them don't fall through the cracks. So we can create a rule here using our special SLA threshold breach trigger. So in this trigger, we can pick any one of our SLAs that we have configured in our service desk. So for example, the time to first response. And then we can pick a few more options. So for example, we could run this rule exactly on the time when this SLA breaches. Or we could also run it maybe just half an hour beforehand, so we have a bit of a heads up. Or we could even run it, say, half an hour or any time period after the breach. So if an issue is overdue, we could send out an emergency notification as well. But in this case, let's just run this rule when the SLA breaches. And then we can actually send out a notification about this. So we can use our Slack message, send Slack message action here to quickly send a Slack message to the whole team telling them, hey, this issue is about to breach. So the way you'd configure this is you'd basically go to your Slack admin section and configure a webhook. And that will give you a URL that you can paste into here. I won't do this right now because then you can send us Slack messages to our Slack channel. And you can simply add a message that will then get posted to Slack. And I'm using another little smart value here to tell them which issue is about to breach. And that's really it. So I'll just give this a name again. And that's all we have to do for this rule. So I can't actually test this rule out today in the webinar because we'd actually have to wait for an SLA to breach, which is not exactly very exciting watching for a webinar. But trust us, this rule works. We use it ourselves internally. And it's a really useful way to make sure that we're not forgetting about some critical support issues. And once again, that allows you to provide a really high-rated or highly rated support offering for your customers. All right, let's look at another rule that's really useful in a support scenario that we use a lot in our service desk. So when customers raise support tickets, they often raise lots of them. So customers don't just raise one case, there'll often be like 5, 6 cases from the same customer. Now, one thing that Service Desk doesn't do out of the box is it doesn't group these support cases together. So you can't see the full history of a particular customer to see what other support cases they've raised previously. And that's something that can be really useful for your support team. So we figured, let's go and create an automation rule that automatically links related support tickets. So once again, we're going to pick the issue created trigger here because we want this rule to run when a customer raises a support request, a new support request. And then next, we're going to use our branch or related issue building block here. Now, this is something that we covered already in the previous webinar. So if this is brand new to you, I encourage you again to watch that last webinar. But today we're going to show you a slightly different usage from the last webinar. So with this building block, you can perform automated actions on related issues. So you can do things with subtasks or parent issues or stories if you're in a software context. But today we're actually going to look for related issues with JQL. And what we're going to do is we're going to search for all issues where the reporter is equal to the reporter that raised the support request that we're running for. So we've got just a bit of JQL here where we're looking for all other issues with the same reporter as the trigger issue. And so this is a smart value here that will get replaced with the actual reporter from this issue. And then all we have to do on this branch is to link those issues back to our trigger issue. So we have a link issue action, and this will now be performed for all matching issues here from the JQL, and they will then link back to our created issue. And that's all we have to do. Let's give this a name again and try it out. All right, so let's jump back into our service desk. Let's create another issue from John. Let's actually use the service desk create request form. oops, and I can't spell please. So now if we jump back to this issue and actually take a look at it, you can see here that the automation rules already created issue links and found all the previous support cases that John has raised. And this is now really quite useful because as a support engineer, I can see how many times John has spilled coffee on his laptop before and broken it. And I can probably tell him that he should be a bit more careful with his coffee rather than always asking for new laptops. And just to show you the audit log again for this execution, you can see here that it executed for this new issue that we created. And then it even shows you all the issues that it linked to that issue. So a really useful, very quick way to get a summary of all your related support issues. All right, for the next rule, we're going to look at a slightly more complex use case. So once again, we're starting off with simple rules and we're going into more complex rules. We've got 2 more rules to go. So this particular rule is a bit of a specific use case. So if you're using Service Desk to provide customer support, but you have a software product that receives public reviews or ratings from customers, then you can use this rule to get a lot of positive reviews for your product. So one thing that we do is we use the satisfaction survey that comes with Service Desk. So this is nothing to do with automation, it's just built into Service Desk, which will send out a survey at the end of a support request to the customer, asking them, how did we do in support? And then the customer will basically reply to us and give us a rating between 1 and 5 to tell us how happy they are with our support. Now, one thing we thought would be really useful is if customers are really happy with our support, so if they give us a 5-star rating, if we could automatically ask them to also leave a review for us in our marketplace listing. And so we created a rule for that. So the way this works is we need to monitor a particular field for change, and we need to look at when the satisfaction field changes. So this is a custom field that's provided by Jira Service Desk that's filled in when a customer replies to that satisfaction survey. So now this rule triggers whenever a satisfaction value is recorded. Next, we need a condition. We need to actually check that the satisfaction rating they've given us is the highest. We only want this rule to run if they've given us a score of 5. So we can use a special smart, oops, and I can't spell, special smart value here to get the actual value that the customers entered. And once again, if this is looking all a bit strange, I'd highly encourage you to watch our last webinar where we went into a lot of detail about how you can figure out these smart values. Okay, so now this rule will run for only issues where we've received the highest rating. Now, the other thing we want to do here is we want to make sure we don't annoy customers. So if we just went ahead and now added a comment to ask them for a review, we would continue to ask them over and over again every time they give us a 5-star rating. And that's not something we wanted to do. We wanted to make sure we only ask a particular customer once to give us a review. And so you can use another condition in an automation rule to check if any other conditions match a particular condition. So in our JQL, in our related issue condition here, we can use a JQL search to look for other issues, other support issues where we've already asked this same customer for a review. So we can use the same construct that we used earlier. So here we're going to find all issues by the same reporter. So this will be all the other issues from this same support case that we're dealing with right now. But this time we also want to make sure, we also want to find all issues where we've asked for a marketplace review before in the comments. And then we only want to run this rule if there's no other issues present. So in other words, if we've not asked this particular customer for a review before, then we continue with this rule. And now we can finally add a comment to ask this particular customer for a review. So here's one that I prepared earlier. So in this comment, we can simply say, you know, thanks for giving us a high support rating. It would be great if you can leave a marketplace review for us as well. and we'd obviously include a link to our marketplace listing or wherever you host your product or wherever you receive public reviews for your product as well. So this is a slightly more complex rule, but once again, we're just combining the different building blocks in different and interesting ways. And we've now very quickly still solved a fairly complex use case of only asking highly rated support cases for review once. All right, so on to our last rule, and this will be by far the most advanced one that we'll show you today. And so for this one, we're actually going to leave our service desk context a little bit. So even though this rule that I'm about to create will be in a software project, it's still a use case that's very useful for support. So a very common way that users or customers use Jira in is to have a software project where you track all your improvements and bugs. And then you have a service desk project where your support staff deal with customer requests. And quite often when a customer request comes in, support staff will link to existing bugs. And they'll also have to check which version of the software is a customer running. And then they'll go to the software project and have to check, has this issue been fixed already or not? And so one thing that's really critical here is that the software issues have the correct fix versions set on them. So you can tell exactly in which version of our software has a bug been resolved. Now, setting versions correctly in Jira is quite a manual task, right? So for example, here we're on our software project. So we've got a feature here that's in progress currently, and there's no fixed version set on this yet. Now, if we released our product, somebody would have to manually set this fixed version, drag it across to done, and all that kind of stuff. So it's very error prone. People always forget to do it. And then you never know in which version of your software a particular feature has been fixed. So today I'm going to show you an automation rule that you can use to automate this. So typically we build our software on a build server or like in some kind of script running somewhere else. And that will create a new version, publish your software to your website, and then we want to update stuff in Jira. So today I'm going to show you how you can automate that scenario. So to do that, we need to jump into the project settings of this project. And I seem to be having a few issues with our demo instance here. Oh, there we go. We're back. Not really sure what happened there. So once again, we'll just jump into the automation section of this software project. And here's a rule that I created earlier that's currently disabled. So let's turn this on and let's take a quick look at what this rule does. So this is a rule that is helping us automate releasing our software. And so we're using a slightly more advanced trigger here, which is the incoming webhook trigger. So this is something that will probably make quite a lot of sense if you know a bit about web development or in particular HTTP requests. But basically what this trigger allows us to do is it allows us to run a rule inside Jira simply by firing a HTTP request at this URL here. So we can make that request from any script, from any build server, anything that can send a HTTP request. And that then will run and perform this automation rule inside Jira, and you can perform all sorts of actions inside Jira. In this case, we're going to run a JQL search to look for all issues that are currently in the in progress status. Next, we're going to create a version, and you can even use data provided in this webhook. So we can have our build script tell us what the new version number is, and then use that information in Jira. And I'll show you an actual example of how you can do this in a second. So we're creating a new version in Jira. We immediately release the version because our build script has just created a new release and uploaded it to our website. And then we can finally go ahead and actually edit all those issues. So all those issues that were in progress that our JQL search found, we set a fixed version, the one that we've just created and released. And then we simply move those issues to done because we've shipped them. Now, this is obviously a little bit of a simplified example. In our actual production workflow, we have a few more statuses. So we actually have a waiting for deployment status that developers will move issues into. And then when our release script deploys it to cloud and server, we add these version numbers to the issues, and then we move it to done. But it's really up to you how your workflow works. But I'm assuming most people have some kind of waiting for deployment status, and then it moves to done. In this case, we're using in progress to indicate that. So that's our rule. So let's go back to our issue. So we've got our issue here that's currently in progress, and there's no fixed version set. Now let's take a look at how we can actually execute this rule. So I've got just a terminal here, and we're going to use the curl command to fire off this webhook. So you can see here we've got the same URL that I had in the UI before. That's generated when you create this automation rule, and then we can simply send some data along here with our version. So we're going to create a 1.5 version here and set that on the issue and release it. So let's go ahead and fire this off. So I'm using curl here, but once again, you can use any script, any programming language, any build server to send a HTTP request that you want. And then if we come back to Jira, you can see that immediately this issue is moved to done, and we've had a fixed version set on this issue. And this would be the same for if there was more issues in the in progress column. So you've immediately tagged all of the issues with the version that you've just released. And if I jump back to the audit log, you can see the successful execution here where we created a new version in Jira, we edited that issue, and we moved it to done. So really, really simple. And this is a very powerful way that you can use to integrate Jira all of a sudden with pretty much any external system that you have. So here I use this to create a version and release a bunch of issues. But you can use the same approach to perhaps pull information from an external system into Jira as well. You could edit other fields and fixed version as well. So this is a really powerful construct that you can use to integrate Jira with external systems. A little bit more advanced, but once again, we're just combining all the different building blocks here in another interesting way. So that's pretty much it for the live demo today. So hopefully we showed you some useful rules for a service desk environment. And I'm just going to hand back over to John for a second to do a few housekeeping tasks and answer the first couple of questions, and then I'll be back to answer some more.
All right. Hi, guys. So we've only got 2 questions so far from Serge and Adam, I think it is. So Andreas will answer those in 2 seconds. I'll just take the opportunity to just say thanks very much, first of all, for attending. I know it's different times around the world. It's 8 a.m. here. Equally, I want to recommend that you go along to our blog, which is blog.codebarrel.io. So anytime we release a new feature, we put it up here. So if you subscribe, you'll always get notified. So for example, just little improvements that we do, stuff about Slack messages, new compatibilities with Tempo, things like that. So I'd really encourage you guys to go there. And lastly, before I hand back to Andreas to tackle the tough questions, if you are going to be attending Summit in Las Vegas, please do come along. We're going to have a booth there. We've got probably way too much swag. I went a bit crazy with the marketing budget this year. So do come along and take a t-shirt or hat or whatever you might have. Okay, I'm going to hand it back to Andreas. Keep any questions coming through. We've still got a good bit of time.
Cool. All right, so first question we have from Adam is so Adam's more interested in the link issues rule that I created. Could we send through the details of that? So to get that, I'll just put a reminder up for the rule playground. So all of these rules are available in the playground. And I believe we have that rule that I demoed in here. So you can actually take a look at it in our playground as well and pretty much just copy it straight from there. So yeah, I'd highly encourage you to check out the playground. You can even go in here and play around with the rules yourself and try out adding different components to see if you could automate perhaps your more specific use case. I believe there's one more in chat. Yeah, I'm just trying to find my chat window here. Here we go. There's one question from Sergey or Serge. So apologies if I butchered your name. So just hoping that we'll show a bit more, a few more demos around Insight and Insight the add-on and how to access Insight fields with smart values in particular. So what I'll say with that is it's probably useful if you go back to our last webinar and watch that. In that, I actually provided some examples of how you can figure out the smart values for pretty much any type of field. Custom fields, particularly the ones provided by other add-ons, can be a little bit tricky sometimes because we can only access the information that those fields provide to us. So it's a little bit up to what those other apps have implemented for their custom fields. With Insight, usually you should be able to access most things, but it depends a bit on the exact custom fields and your configuration of Jira and Insight, I guess. So I'd say if you're still having issues, even after you've watched the last webinar, then please open a support request with us, and we should potentially, we should be able to help you out with that as well. Okay, apparently in the previous demo, we said we would explain it in this demo. Thanks for keeping us honest. I'm not sure we did make that promise, but apologies if we did. But yeah, like I said, like it's probably best if you raise a support request with us if you're having a specific question around the Insight custom field. All right, I think that's actually kind of it for questions today. Unless, oh, there's one more that came in. I'm not sure that's a question, Robert. So there's a question from Robert saying, thanks for the presentation. I've got some ideas for our service, but I have to ask, how can John open a ticket if his keyboard is broken?
Oh, I'm glad you're paying attention. It's a good question.
John?
I do it through my phone, and that way I can get it. So that's
very good.
That problem.
Very good. I don't know. Do we have any other questions or joke submissions? We'll be happy to take those as well. But yeah, if not, I think that's probably it for today.
No, nice and quiet this morning. So look, as I said, I'm going to send an email afterwards with a link to all of the webinars. So by all means, put through a support ticket and we'll just answer that personally back and forth. But otherwise, it's been a pleasure. We're going to take a little break from webinars while we go over to Las Vegas and gamble. I mean, work on that last hit stuff. But we'll be back in May and we'll have a few new webinars then. So everybody enjoy your weekends and thanks so much for attending again.
And come say hello at our booth in Vegas if you're there.
Cheers, guys.